In this movie, we'll begin our solution to the Code Clinic challenge by learning how to get a start date and an end date from the user via the command line. I've given you the beginnings of this project in the exercise files, and I've put them in a directory called code_clinic_1. I'm going to open up that directory inside the project view of TextMate so that I can both see the directory structure here on the left and also work with the code and the files using the tabs over here on the right. The main file that we're going to be working with is lake_readings.rb. That's the main program that we're going to be running. Because we're going to be running it from the command line, it's a good practice to include a shebang line right at the beginning. That's what we call this when we have a hash followed by an exclamation point. This provides a hint to Unix that this program ought to be run using Ruby. It's not strictly necessary, but it is a good best practice. After that, I'm going to be writing Ruby code. The first Ruby method that I'm going to be using is requireRelative, and that's going to load in all the code that's inside my functions file. We'll look at those in a moment. After that, I'm going to output an introduction explaining what this script does, and then I'm going to call another method here that I've written. It's inside my functions file, and it's called queryUserForDateRange. It's going to return two values to us, start date and end date. Now, those of you with some computer programming experience know that a function or a method really can't return two values. It can only return one thing. But we can get around that by returning the different values that we want as an array. And that's what we're doing here. QueryUserForDate is going to return an array, and then it's going to assign that to another array here. We don't have the square brackets around it. Ruby allows us to omit those in this case, which makes it look nice. But that's what it's actually doing. It's assigning an array of values to an array of variables. After we have a start date and an end date from the user, we're eventually going to do a lot with those. We're going to query the remote server in order to get the data that we want. But we'll get to that later. For now, let's just simply output the dates that we received to the screen so that we can see them. And I'm going to use string from time in order to do that. The string that's provided here as an argument is a set of formatting codes that tells the function how that ought to be displayed. Don't worry too much about what those are. You can look them up. It just simply tells it that it's going to be the full name of the month and then the date, comma, followed by a 4-digit year. So you can see we've kept things pretty simple in our Lake Readings file, and we're going to continue to do that. We're going to put the meat of our work inside our functions. So let's switch over to functions now. At the top of the file, you'll notice that I'm requiring two things, readline and date. Readline and date are both part of the Ruby standard library. They come automatically with Ruby, but they don't load automatically. If we want to make use of them, we have to tell Ruby that it ought to load up that code so that we can use it. Readline is a library that allows us to interact with the user and to get user input. Now, it's not the only way to do it. We can use something just called gets, and gets will ask the user for user input. But readline offers some nice improvements on this. It's better about letting us edit the text on the line, and it also provides a history where we can use our up and down arrows to find commands that we've worked with in the past. Basically, it makes our user input work the same way that the regular command line Unix works. So we're going to be making use of that here. And then anytime we want to work with dates, we need to tell it to load up its date library. And of course, we're going to be working with dates here because that's what we're asking the user for. The first method that I've got after that is queryUserForDateRange that we saw being called from the other page. It's just simply going to ask the user for a start date and an end date. It's going to do that by calling another method called queryUserForDate. And we're going to call that twice, once for the start date and once for the end date. That's nice because it gives us a place to encapsulate all the logic about a single interaction, getting a date from the user, into one method. And then we can call it twice. This is called don't repeat yourself. And it's always a good idea in programming to not repeat yourself when you can help it. So let's look at this method now. QueryUserForDate. To begin with, date is going to be nil. After that, I've got a loop that says until the date is an actual date object. Until we have a date object to work with, keep looping. That's going to ensure that we don't exit our loop until we have a date that we can work with. After that, we're going to call readline. So readline.readline is going to ask the user for input. It's just going to stop and wait for them. And it will do it by first providing whatever prompt we've given them. And you can see I set prompt up here to please enter a date with the format that we prefer. 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit days. The true that we provide as a second argument to readline tells readline that whatever response it gets from the user ought to be added to the history of responses so that we can use the up and down arrows to find it again. When we try this out, we'll see how that can be helpful. So after it pauses and it waits for the user to put input and the user hits the return button, then that value will be assigned to the variable response. Whenever we're asking for a response from the user, I think it's a nice feature to have something like this next section. We're going to exit the script, completely exit out, if the response that we received was not a date, but was instead quit, exit, Q, or X. Any of those things will allow the user to just bail out immediately and quit the script. They don't have to suffer through the rest of our prompts that we might have in store for them. Assuming that they don't do that though, we're going to take the response that they gave us and we're going to use date. Again, that's part of the date standard library that we loaded in. We're going to call parse on it. Parse takes a string and tries to turn it into a date object. If it fails for any reason, it doesn't recognize the date, it can't figure out how to parse it into a date, it will return an argument error. And that's why I've got this parse inside this begin end rescue block. It's going to rescue it in the case that it's an argument error and just output invalid date format. That keeps it from just blowing up on me altogether. And then, assuming that it was able to parse it into a date, then it will pass our test up here for whether it's a date or not, and so it will return that date back to the calling method, which was here. Query user for date, query user for date, and then it returns both of those, again, as an array. We don't have to put the square brackets around it. It is an array, and that will return it back to our lake readings, and we'll output it to the screen. Let's see how it all works. Let's go over to our terminal. I'm going to go into my user directory, into my desktop, and into Code Clinic 1. Now remember, with Ruby files, we can really put this anywhere on our hard drive. It doesn't have to live in a particular place. I just happen to have put mine on the desktop, so it's nice and easy. So once I'm in there, let's take a look at the files that are in there, and you'll see that lakereadings.rb is the file that I want to run. So let's call ruby lakereadings.rb, and let's hit return. You'll see that I get my introduction. First, we need a start date. Please enter a date. All right, so let's enter a date. Let's try entering 2014-01- and instead of a valid date, let's put in 45. That's not a good date. Invalid date format. Date parse through an error, through an argument error, and so now it's asking us for the date all over again. See how that loop worked? It kicked right back in and asked us to provide a valid start date again. 201-01. There we are. Next, we need an end date. Okay, so it did accept that one. Now, if I hit the up arrow, you'll see that my previous response is still there. That's what readline does. It adds that to the history, and that allows me just to edit this and put in another date. Let's say the 2nd day of January. I'll hit return, and now it outputs both those dates to me. That lets me know that Ruby was able to accept the user input, to turn it into a date, and then to turn that date back into a string for output here. So we are successfully getting user input. In the next movie, let's look at how we can validate the user input to make sure that the values are something that we can actually work with.